Hello confirmation friends, and welcome to confirmation instruction video number 9. It's great to be able to welcome you. This is a very important chapter that we're about to discuss in Manna and Mercy, one of the most significant events in the people's history occurs. After the Exodus, what we're about to discuss in terms of the exile is probably the most memorable and important event in the history of the people to this point. So, having said that, let's begin. We're discussing chapter 8 in Manna and Mercy, by the waters of Babylon. Okay, now from last time, you remember that big deal kings arose both in the northern kingdom of Israel and in the southern kingdom of Judah. The kings, the elites, the upper classes were all warned by the prophets, by Isaiah reminding the people of Judah, and Amos reminding the people of Israel that this was all going to come to ruin if they kept following their ways and ignoring their purpose as people of Manna and Mercy, and forgetting the lessons that they learned in the wilderness. Well, the prophets saw catastrophe coming, and their warnings weren't listened to, and indeed the northern kingdom of Israel was overrun by the Assyrians in about 722 BCE, so 720 years before Jesus. The Assyrians overran the northern kingdom of Israel and its 10 tribes, and then in 587 BCE, the Babylonians overran the southern kingdom of Judah and its 2 tribes. So just to give you a little sense of how that is, here's a giant map. This map is so big I couldn't even hold it up for you. So here we go. Here's Assyria over here, and they overrun the tiny little kingdom of Israel there, and then the Babylonian Empire here, and they overrun the tiny little kingdom of Judah there, 150 years later or so. So there it is, and the 10, so here's my own little picture of it. The Assyrians overrun Israel there, and the Babylonians overrun Judah. Big trouble, because the northern kingdom was completely destroyed by the Assyrians, and so the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel vanish. So okay, the kingdom of Judah goes on for another 150 years or so, but then they're overrun by the Babylonians. And the leaders, the middle and upper classes, tens of thousands of people of the southern kingdom were taken into exile in Babylon for 70 years, 50 to 70 years. And so the 2 tribes of Judah remain, but by and large their people are in exile in Babylon. There it is. Exile in Babylon. It's hard to overestimate the impact that this event had. The people were in exile for around 70 years in Babylon, and this was a crushing time. They wondered, the people did, whether God had forsaken them. You might remember that God had made promises to David and to his descendants that his house would rule forever. That's a big promise made by God, and yet here the line of Davidic kings comes to an end. The people wonder, how can this be? Was God not able to help them? Had God refused to help them? How could God let this happen to the people? Well, to be fair, God had warned them through the prophets, And the people felt this to be a punishment from God, but in fact we can see that this was simply the consequences of the people's behavior. This is what happens when manna becomes something to be hoarded, when greed becomes the overriding concern in society, when you start trusting in dodgy alliances with greater powers, you get crushed. You can see on the map how much bigger the Babylonian Empire and the Assyrian Empire is compared to Judah and Israel. These are the kinds of things that happen. And yet, the exile becomes one of the most fruitful times in the people's history. In fact, prophets arise to comfort the people. I had you read Psalm 137 in the assignment, and there the psalmist laments, right, that they're far from home, they are sad. They hung up their harps by the river because they don't feel like singing. They're so sad they cannot sing. There we wept, the psalmist writes. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? The Babylonians had destroyed their homes, their farms, and indeed the temple that had been built to God. Everything had been taken from them. They were lost, forsaken, and alone, and not sure what the future held for them as a people. And for those who remembered God's promises, they wondered what would become of God's promises, not only for them, but for the whole world. Well, a prophet arose who promised the people comfort. We don't know this prophet's name. I had you read some things from Isaiah 40, I think, in the assignment. And actually, yeah, we don't know this prophet's name, but because he seemed to be from the school of the prophet Isaiah, his prophecies were included in the book of that name. So sometimes he is called Second Isaiah. But this prophet foresaw something great for the people, foresaw restoration, foresaw return to the land, foresaw a restoration of the promise that awaited the people and the possibility of them becoming once again God's manna people in the world. So I had you read some stuff from Isaiah 40 and from 43. God would return them home. God would do the Exodus all over again and return the people from exile in a second Exodus back home. The prophets, in Jeremiah was a prophet in 31. I had you read Jeremiah 31, where there's another promise that, part of the problem before was that I think God perhaps felt God hadn't communicated as well as God could to the people. And so now God takes the initiative again and says, well, not only will I send you prophets, but now I will send my very spirit inside of you. And, I will put my way right inside of you so that everyone will know it. I will write my way on your heart. And you read that in Jeremiah 31, that beautiful, beautiful promise. God, the people will know God so intimately and so well that they will much more easily be God's people. The prophets had a wondrous vision that everyone would know God intimately, that the people would be forgiven, that the people will return to living the manna way, and then when the nations all around them see how beautiful the people are living together, the non-Jewish peoples will come to them and want to learn this new way of being together. Manna will be shared by all people, and peace, or that great peace we talked about before, shalom, is a wonderful Hebrew word called shalom, will come to the whole world through this. So the people will be a light to the nations, and the nations will be drawn to this light and want to learn God's ways from them. And in this way, blessing will come to all peoples. the promise will come true. The promise that was made to Abraham and Sarah way back in Genesis 12 will finally come true. So you can see how God finds a way of bringing something good out of something bad, right? God is very persistent and relentless in pursuing God's dream. The people are not perfect, but God figures out a way somehow of bringing good out of even the people's imperfections. This is how God works. During this time, as you also read in Manna and Mercy, God began, people continued and intensified their gathering of all the old stories. Scripture began to be written down during this time, and this gave the people a lot of encouragement as they rediscovered some of the old stories and wrote some new ones. The famous account of creation in Genesis 1 was actually written during this time. And I didn't assign it, but if you go and read it, it's very ordered, right? On the first day, God did this. On the second day, God created this. On the third day, God created this. And almost as if to remind the people that despite the fact that they are experiencing chaos in their current situation in exile, there is a fundamental order to the universe. God has ordered things, and God will bring order back to their world once again. A great secret in the heart of God is announced by the prophet, and I love the way Daniel Erlander draws this, this wonderful secret that, in fact, the people need not be concerned about retaliating or about responding in violence for the violence done to them. Rather, the prophet announces the secret in the heart of God, which is salvation for all, saving the world, healing for the world, comes through the power of one willing to suffer in love and not retaliate. Wellness comes through one willing to love and forgive. This is a great secret in life. It is the secret to many of our relationships in life, but it is also the secret to the healing of the world. About 500 years after this is written, someone will come who embodies this. And we know who that person is, but that is a story for another day. After 70 years in exile, I love my exile sign so much, I'll show it to you again. After 70 years in exile in Babylon, the Babylonians are defeated by an even bigger empire, the Persians. And the Persians, under their king, Cyrus, defeat Babylon, and they allow the exiles to return to Judah. Now, it's not like Cyrus was just this super nice guy. Scripture remembers Cyrus as being kind of an instrument of God, right? He is the one who would defeat the Babylonians and allow the people to return. I mean, yeah, he allows them to return, but he also has the Judah under his control and expects them to send him lots of money and tribute every year while he sets up a puppet king in Judah to rule on his behalf. So it's not like he's a super nice guy or anything, but the people are allowed to return home. This is Cyrus's foreign policy is different from the Babylonians. He allows the people to return and run their own country on his behalf. Those who return to Judah find their homes destroyed, their farms destroyed, so it's difficult to feed each other when their farms are destroyed. And of course, they find the temple destroyed. It's heartbreaking for the people when they return. They had so much hope, of course, in being allowed to return, but when they return home, they find that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to grow their own food. Their homes have been destroyed. The temple that they had had so much pride in Jerusalem had been destroyed. And life is not easy for them. And in fact, they are easily discouraged. But God raises up leaders, and especially well known are the leaders Ezra and Nehemiah. And under their leadership, homes are rebuilt, farms are rebuilt, and they begin to rebuild the temple. but most importantly, they begin to restore the manna society and God's dream for the people. Teachers also arise, Haggai, Habakkuk, and Malachi, who are remembered as the great prophets of this time, and who encourage them, as I said, not only to restore their houses and their walls and their temple, but also to restore the manna society. And so it's a time when God's heart is filled with hope, when there is struggle for the people, but also a promise that they discover they can find themselves part of once again. I can't overemphasize how important this event of the exile is in the Bible. If you're following weekly sermons and devotions, you can see just how often the event of the exile and its aftermath is referred to by other biblical writers. Many of the prophets, of course. The Psalms are filled with references to this catastrophic event and how God works in some amazing way to bring something good out of catastrophe. Next time, we will examine what happens with the people after they return to the land and some of the struggles that they have, and some of the things that happen in getting ready for discussing the birth of Jesus, which will happen about 500 years after the people return home. Thank you so much for your time. I am greatly appreciative of your attention to this. This part of the story might seem a little bit like, why is this important? But in fact, if you want to understand what Christianity is about, you won't understand, you won't get that if you don't understand this very important piece of the story. So thanks for your patience. Thanks for your diligence in doing the assignments. Thank you for your time here with me today. I hope you keep well. I hope everything is okay. I miss you all. I wish we were meeting in person, and I can't wait for the day when we can. But until next week, stay well, my young friends, and I'll be in touch this way again next time. Bye-bye.